You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.
You're listening to the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres Edition, your source for all news, press conference reactions, analysis, and objective discussions regarding the NHL's Buffalo Sabres from right here in the Niagara region. Here are your hosts, Brandon Caputo and Austin Broad.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres Edition right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network, your July 18th, 2021 edition, your source North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans, delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. You can find us on social media for updates and giveaways by following the podcast on Twitter at Armchair GM Pod, as well as this show's podcast. Make sure you're following it at AGM Sabres Pod. We're always posting interactive polls for our shows on that account. As well, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram. You can listen to us on many different platforms, including Spreaker.com, the free Spreaker app, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Deezer, and obviously in video form here on YouTube. So make sure you're hitting that like button, that subscribe button, and smashing that bell icon for all updates on shows that come up on our YouTube channel for the network. So make sure you're following us on whatever platform you're listening to us right now. And lastly, our beautiful user-friendly website, armchairgmsports.com, for all things regarding the network, including articles, podcast episodes, sponsors, and contributors. Everything's in there for you guys. Please go and check that out, and please give us some love over there as well. As always, I'm one of your hosts of the Sabres Edition podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me right underneath there, at Caputs13_AGM, with a Canadian Z, obviously. And I'm always joined on the Sabres portion of the network by my good friend, and he's a busy man these days with a lot of draft prospect stuff. He is the one and only Austin Broad. You can follow him on Twitter at Austin_Broad. Austin, welcome back for another Sabres show. It's been a little bit. I know you've been really tied up with the prospect stuff. Let us know what you got going on. You got a lot of interesting stuff before the draft here.
Yeah, I got a lot of work going with FC hockey and the Charging Buffalo. FC stuff kind of slowing down a bit. The draft guide came out. If you go there now, you can check out my deep dive on Owen Power and a couple more articles there, draft related, but pretty much just gearing up for the Charging Buffalo draft guide and the future of the 716 podcast stuff.
Perfect. So make sure you're going and checking out Austin's stuff over there as well. So on today's show, ladies and gentlemen, obviously today, at the time of recording this episode, the lists have been released for the Seattle expansion draft, and what players are going to be available, what players are going to be kept by each team. Obviously, we're going to go over Buffalo's list here, who they kept, who's available, and we're going to kind of discuss who we think might get scooped up by the Seattle Kraken this coming Wednesday in the expansion draft as well. We got some Jack Eichel trade scenarios here. I'm going to get Austin's thoughts on what he thinks on some of those potential landing spots and where Eichel might end up going here in the next week and a half of the draft, free agency, all that good stuff. And then obviously we'll talk about the draft coming up next Friday, kind of, where the Sabres are going to be picking, and Austin's going to kind of just briefly discuss one player that might be available that he might like in those certain rounds that might be there for the Sabres that might not be as notable as the top guys and maybe not the first overall pick. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, let's start off the show today. And obviously the big news is Donnie Meatballs, as you can see on the screen there. Don Granato has been named the official head coach of the Buffalo Sabres. And Austin, I think you're pretty happy about this, him being having the interim tag removed and now being the official coach of the Sabres. And it's interesting because now you kind of know what direction the team's going in. We were wondering what head coach they were going to choose. Were they going to choose a grizzled veteran, a first-time head coach from the NCAA? But they decided to keep Don Granato around after his short job interview with the team in the second half of the season. And they must have been impressed with what they saw.
Yeah, it's not even with the fact that they're impressed with what they saw, because you saw Granato take a young team and kind of make them exciting again. But when you just look at the Sabres and you look at what is going to be happening this year and probably the year after that, they're going to go young. They're going to transition to a new core. why not have this guy who preaches development and got some success from those young guys? Why not let him stay here? And they gave him a 3-year deal. Maybe he earns another deal after that, but at least for the next 3 years, I can tell you that they're probably not expecting to be competing. So why not have this guy come in and try and develop young guys like Casey Middlestat, Dylan Cousins, Henry Jokiharju, Rasmus Dahlin, the list goes on, and just see what they can do out of it. Because, his record on the surface wasn't all that impressive, but what he was able to do with a Sabres team that, minus Taylor Hall, minus Jack Eichel, and pretty much what was arguably the worst year that Buffalo ever had. I know that wasn't historically bad for them, but it was, in terms of fans turning on the franchise, things like that, it was probably the worst year Buffalo's ever had, and Granato was the saving grace in that. So he earned it, and we'll see what happens 3 years from now, but I can guarantee you, at least for the next 3 years, we got someone to come in here and hopefully get this ship righted going forward.
And obviously, this is a long time coming for Don Granato as well, Austin. How many... he hasn't had a chance really in the NHL as a head coach. He's obviously been an assistant. I have up on the screen there for the YouTube viewers there. The Chicago Blackhawks, he was an assistant. He's been a coach for a very, very long time. University of Wisconsin, the U.S. National Under-17 team, the Chicago Wolves, the St. Louis Blues, the Worcester Ice Cats, and, the list goes on and on. But he's been a coach since 1993 and, finally getting his first NHL official head coaching job in 2021. That has to be big for him for his entire journey as a hockey player and then transitioning to a coach and the grind it's taken. Some guys take it for granted getting a head coaching job really young, but Don Granato is the epitome of being able to just grind it out and, pay your dues and make your way, make your opportunity. And he's really deserving of this chance so late into his whole coaching career here.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, looking at his staff profile right now, I got it up here on my monitor. He has not been a head coach since 2015-16 when he was with the national development team in the States. 1 year assistant at Wisconsin with his brother Tony, who's a fantastic college coach. 2 years as an assistant with the Blackhawks, and then Botterill brought him in. I'm going to assume it was Botterill who brought him in as an assistant because when Adams when Adams got rid of Kruger, they made a point to keep Donnie Granato. So I have to assume that when Granato was brought in, he wasn't a part of Ralph Kruger's regime, because usually the way it works in the NHL is the GM picks an assistant coach, the head coach picks an assistant coach. I'm going to assume Kruger picked Steve Smith because he was let go at the same time as Kruger, and Granato was kept here. And Granato said the other day his intentions are to keep Ellis and Girardi, and hopefully that holds true, because again, that whole coaching staff deserves at least a shot at developing this team and laying the foundation going forward, because what Girardi was able to do with the defense, as long as they can write the special teams, because that's still something that struggled immensely under Granato. But if they can figure out the special teams, their 5-on-5 play was great, and what Girardi was able to get out of Jokiharju and Dahlin once Kruger was gone was good. So hopefully this entire coaching staff gets to run it back. I think Granato said that's kind of their main goal, is to keep those two on board, and if it works out that way, I'm not going to say we're in good hands because we don't really know, but it's at least it's what the fans wanted, and it's what I wanted, and it makes sense for Buffalo's transitional period that we assume we're going to be entering.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Ralph Kruger era is officially over, and the Don Granato, Donnie Meatballs era has begun. And like you mentioned, it's going to be really exciting to see what that young coaching staff can do. And two recently retired NHL players, and Matt Ellis and Dan Girardi, and like you mentioned, they did some good stuff there. So we'll see if they keep them around and kind of what this coaching staff does with this expected to be very young group going forward. But it looks like for now that was a good hire, and we'll have to see if Don Granato can take that next step with these guys that he kind of took in the second half of the season. But with that, let's move on to the big topic of today, and that obviously is the expansion draft coming up. And for the Seattle Kraken on Wednesday, the protection lists have come out just now that we are going to kind of react to here for the Sabres, and kind of just, general thoughts on that. So I have it up on the screen here. The Sabres have protected Rasmus Asplund, Anders Bjork, Rasmus Dahlin, Jack Eichel, Henry Jokiharju, Casey Middlestat, Victor Olofsson, Sam Reinhart, Rasmus Ristolainen, Tage Thompson, and Linus Ullmark. Firstly, with the guys that they protected, Austin, was there anybody that really stuck out to you there that or shocked you, or was this basically the list that you had expected from the beginning?
I think the only shock was last week when they announced that Jeff Skinner had waived his no movement clause to allow himself to be exposed. That was something I wasn't 100% sure that they were going to do. Once they did that, no, this list is pretty much what I thought. I think maybe there was a bit of a maybe it's just a classic Sabres fan doubt, but I think there might have been a little bit of back and forth between are they going to protect Asplund or Girgensons. I didn't really have much of a doubt there. I assume once they got Skinner to be exposed, it was Asplund, Tage, and Bjork were all going to be guaranteed to be protected. And today it's what it came out on the blue line. No way you're leaving Dahlin or Yoki Haru unprotected. It came down to Ristolainen and Borgen, and I wasn't shocked that Ristolainen was protected. I know a lot of people aren't going to be too thrilled with it, but no shock really to me. The biggest shock was they actually went out of their way to protect Ullmark, who's a UFA, so Seattle can't negotiate with him. But I'm still I don't know about you, but I think Ullmark's pretty much gone. So I was a little bit shocked they protected him. But at the end of the day, you have one protection slot for a goalie, you might as well use it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they weren't going to use it on Carter Hutton or any of these other goaltenders that were available here. So maybe they still think they have a chance to re-sign Linus Ullmark in the next week here, but that's to be seen. And Linus Ullmark, it's interesting because the Sabres gave up a draft pick in order for Vegas to not take him in their expansion draft. When Vegas ended up taking Carrier from Buffalo, they basically had to give up a draft pick for Vegas not to take Ullmark, and now they keep him in this expansion draft here. So it'll be interesting if they can get a contract extension with him. But there's a lot to talk about with the people who are available, Austin. So what are we thinking here? You already mentioned Jeff Skinner waived his no-move clause. Again, he's making $9 million. It would have to be something astronomical for the Sabres to be able to get rid of that contract, especially now seeing all the other teams around the league that are exposing these top-end players that are making a ton of money. You can't be taking on 6 or 7 of these guys that eat up their entire cap space already as a team that hasn't even started yet. So it would have to be something astronomical, but it makes sense from a standpoint that they can put Skinner out there, they're not going to take them, and they can kind of hold on to somebody that could be exposed by Buffalo. If it was somebody like, I don't know if they were interested in Bjork, Ristolainen, or Yoki Haru, somebody like that, Middlestat. It just gives you the opportunity to protect another one of those guys. But Kyle Okposo's another name, obviously, that had been linked to possibly Buffalo making a trade. We would assume that Buffalo would have had to give up a pretty significant draft pick for Seattle to take Okposo for 2 more years. But just general thoughts on who's available here. We know, obviously, the names that have been thrown around in our polls were obviously Will Borgen, Zemgus Girgensons, and Colin Miller, the expansion darling. But just your general thoughts on who's available out there and who you ultimately think is going to be taken by Seattle in the expansion draft.
Yeah, so quickly I'll touch on Okposo and Skinner quick, because one thing that I don't think people realize is Buffalo has $34 million in cap space right now. Sure, they have some players they need to sign. But we're looking at the impending trades of Jack Eichel and Rasmus Ristolainen. That's give or take $15 million more coming off their books. If they lose Okposo or Skinner, that's a big chunk of change that they're going to need to replace in order to get to the cap floor. So I think, one, I don't think Seattle is interested in Skinner. I mean, let's face it. Skinner could still get back to his goal scoring form, but not worth the $9 million for as many years left. Okposo, again, with them transitioning to a young core, he's honestly, I'm not exactly sold on the locker room type of culture, blah, 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 but if you buy into that, Okposo's the guy you want here. Let's face it. I mean, he's lost his step on the ice, but he still comes to work every day. He still says the right things. He's still that guy that, if you believe in that role model type of player, that's Kyle Okposo to a T. He's earned the right to say, hey, if don't trade me to Seattle because I want to be here. And if Okposo tells you that, he's earned the right where you allow him that. It's 2 more years. You're not going to be good for 2 more years. And if you are, it doesn't matter. He's a 4th line player anyway. I think it really comes down to Zemgus Girgensons or Colin Miller. Looking at the lists available, I mean, Seattle's going to have a lot of defense to choose from. So earlier today, I was sold on pretty much it was Colin Miller no matter what. He's a proven top 6 defenseman. He's got 1 year left. He could be a nice rental for them at the deadline. Looking at their forward group, I mean, Zemgus Girgensons, Cody Eakin, Kyle Okposo, or Jeff Skinner. Out of those 4, let's face it, Zemgus Girgensons is the best one. I've said it all along. This expansion draft is great for Buffalo because they're not losing anything of substance, and whoever they lose, it's not going to have a drastic impact on their lineup. So if I was a betting man, I'd say it's Colin Miller or Zemgus Girgensons. I'm still heavily leaning towards Colin Miller, but wouldn't be surprised at all if Girgensons ends up being the pick from Seattle.
I've got it up on the screen for our YouTube viewers here on the entire screen there, Austin, from Cap Friendly, of who's possibly available. And just looking, like you mentioned, they're going to need some cap space, or they're going to need to have some guys that take up some cap space, because like you mentioned, if they have $34 million in cap space available and they give up, a Jack Eichel or some of these other guys that are making a ton of money, then it just doesn't make sense. You're going to have to replace that money and overpay somebody in free agency just to get to the cap floor or take on some dead money somewhere like we saw with Arizona do with Andrew Ladd. And I don't know if they want to go that route or anything like that, but there's a lot of options, that are here for Seattle. But again, like you mentioned, it's not going to be something of huge significance like we see with some of the other teams around the league, which is kind of good for Buffalo in a way that they're not really going to be losing, a top end player. They didn't make Rasmus Ristolainen available, which would have been the one guy that I thought might have been of substance for Seattle that really could have made a difference. But other than that, like you mentioned, Colin Miller really seems like, the choice at this point. People are wondering about the Will Borgen situation, Austin, and what are your quick thoughts on that? Obviously, we were impressed by his 15 games last year, but there are some people that say, why would they take a guy that barely played last year and there wasn't enough sample size? Do you think that that's, better for Buffalo, that's maybe he's not as looked at as valuable as some of these other players because they see him down the road as being, a viable option on that D core?
Yeah, so quickly, if they left Ristolainen exposed, I'm still not 100% convinced that he's gone. I mean, Seattle is still heavily invested in the analytics. Let's face it, Ristolainen's analytics are terrible. They protected him because I think they're trying to trade him, and you don't want to risk losing a trade asset that you're going to get something for and let him go to Seattle. The Will Borgen thing, he's 25 years old. He's played 14 games in the NHL. He's looked very good in those 14 games. Don't get me wrong. I think Will Borgen's a very nice player. I think Will Borgen is just a case of people in Buffalo, every time we have something remotely good, we overvalue it. And I think that's a little bit of what's going on with Will Borgen. Again, it's not a shot at Will Borgen. He is a very good hockey player. But at the end of the day, a 25-year-old with 14 games of NHL experience, I don't know why that's appealing to Seattle, except for the fact that Jason Botterill's in Seattle. But then again, it took Will Borgen until he was 25 years old to come into Buffalo. Botterill never gave him a spot in the lineup. So while Will Borgen's a very good player, and it would sting a little bit because he is a 25-year-old right-hand shot defenseman that we could use going forward, at the end of the day, that's not a catastrophic loss to Buffalo if he's gone. But I'm still leaning more towards Seattle wants – Miller makes more sense. He's more experienced. He's more proven. And if worst comes to worst, he's got 1 year left. He makes a nice rental piece for them at the trade deadline. Again, depending on if they really want Zemgus Girgensons or Kyle Oposo, I think it comes down to a defense. I've always thought Buffalo was going to lose a defenseman. Even if Rasmus Asplund was exposed, I still was leaning towards it being a defenseman. And right now, Colin Miller is the most appealing unprotected defenseman Buffalo has. Buffalo does not have any appealing pieces unprotected. Like it's actually a good situation that Buffalo is in right now, because if I'm looking at their list, I even as a Sabres fan, I'm like, I don't really care who we lose. And that's, while the team is terrible, at least we're not, losing. Again, I don't know if these other teams care that they left these players unprotected, but we're not at risk of losing a Gabriel Landeskog, even though he'd need to sign a contract. We're not at risk of losing a Mark Giordano, the captain of Calgary, who's probably been their heart and soul. Like, the Buffalo's really, there's nothing at risk for them here. It's lose your player and walk away. Unless Seattle comes out and signs Jake McCabe, but in which case I don't think Jake McCabe's signing back here anyway. So at the end of the day, it's not really a net loss.
Yeah, it's not like they're losing somebody of substance that's going to be going forward here, with the franchise. But again, quickly before we move on here, Jeff Skinner did waive his new no-move clause last week, and that was interesting. If Skinner was still, on the Sabres protection list because of his no-move clause, what player do you think that they would have had to kind of expose in that draft? And do you think that that would have been something that the Sabres could have been possibly worried about? We know that, there really isn't that much to lose at this point with their protection list. But if Skinner had to have been on that list, who was the player that you could see Seattle maybe scooping up that the Sabres wouldn't have been able to protect in that scenario?
So if Skinner is protected because he didn't waive his no move, or Buffalo didn't ask him, I think it comes down to Tage Thompson or Rasmus Asplund. I don't think they're exposing Anders Bjork, the main piece from the Taylor Hall trade. I just don't see it happening. I think it comes down to Tage or Asplund, and I think it would have been Asplund left unprotected. They gave Tage Thompson a 3-year, $1.4 million contract. Kevin Adams gave him that. It wasn't the previous regime. It was Kevin Adams who gave that. So obviously they see something there. It's no one wants to hear it because it's a terrible way of thinking, but it's the last piece remaining from the O'Reilly trade. I'm sure they had some thought of that. They shouldn't ever think like that, but I'm sure they did. Asplund and Thompson were both very good under Don Granato, so I think losing one of them would have hurt. But I'm still not fully convinced that Seattle takes Asplund or Thompson over Colin Miller. There's probably a better chance than, Zemgus Girgensons for sure, because Asplund has a little bit more of that offensive upside. Tage Thompson clearly has offensive upside. So that would have stung a little bit more, but thankfully Adams went to Skinner. Skinner was, ready, willing, and able to do it. And we don't have to talk about this because that would have hurt a little bit more. Still, I don't think it would have been a catastrophic loss, but that would have hurt a lot more than potentially losing Colin Miller or Zemgus Girgensons or Will Borgen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Asplund would have been the guy eventually taken if Skinner had to have been kept. He was actually the guy that we had picked for our article on ArmchairGMSports.com we went through each team, selected, and basically made a team for Seattle. So you go check that out. That's up on the channel right now. We actually had to change it because when Skinner waived his no-move clause, we actually had Asplund being the one that was taken by Seattle, so we had to go back and change that to Colin Miller afterwards. So kind of things have been changing this last week. It's been kind of hectic around the league, but it's good stuff for us and the most exciting time of the year, the offseason stuff for the NHL. So with that said, we're going to get into more of the offseason stuff right after the break. We're going to get into some draft stuff. Austin's going to give us some tidbits on who might be available for the Sabres later on in the draft, and as well some Jack Eichel trade kind of rumors, kind of seeing which ones are real, which ones are kind of kind of ridiculous, and which ones are just kind of good for discussion, and then as well the results of the Twitter poll. So stay right here. We'll be right back on the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, and right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano, serving traditional style Italian pizzas made with the freshest top quality ingredients. Loaded subs and their famous chicken wings. Winners of the Reader's Choice Diamond Award 4 years running from Niagara this week for best pizza and wings in Niagara Falls. Home of the best tray and wing combo in town for the price and quality. Open daily from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Located on the corner of Drummond Road and Dunn Street. Available for call-ahead pickup or delivery at 905-374-4400. Make sure to like them on Facebook and view their website for their menu at carmine'spizzeria.ca. Carmine's Pizzeria Italiano. Way too good. As we all adjust to this new world that we're living in today, masks are now mandatory, and Niagara's own Custom PPE is Canada's leading face mask provider. Visit them online at customppe.ca and choose between several mask options with different colors and sizes. Add your organization, company, or team logo so you make your face masks unique. Available to purchase online 24/7 at customppe.ca and shipped within 1 week. They have the best prices and quickest turnaround in Canada, and no order is too big or too small. Also offering custom floor stickers as well as face and counter shields for your business or workplace. Visit customppe.ca and use the code ARMCHAIR at checkout for 20% off your custom or blank face mask today. Custom PPE, Canada's leading face mask provider. Attention job seekers, if you are currently looking for work in the Niagara region, you owe it to yourself to check out the services provided by the Niagara Employment Help Center, located at 6100 Thoroldstone Road, Niagara Falls, directly across from the Camisos Plaza. Their free services include resume and cover letter writing, community resource and referral information, local labor market information, job search strategies, assistance with clarifying employment training and career goals, employment counseling and job search support, second career information and registration assistance, and all their services are currently provided by appointment only. So give them a call at 905-358-0021 or visit their website at ehc.on.ca, the Niagara Employment Help Center. This Employment Ontario program is funded by the Government of Ontario.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, guys, welcome back to segment 2 of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres Edition. Austin Broad and Brandon Capital back with you here. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, that bell icon, and subscribing on our YouTube channel as it shows up on the screen there. So make sure that you want to do all that to keep up to date on all of our stuff on the network. So we're going to quickly discuss some of the Jack Eichel trade rumors here, and Austin's just going to give me his thoughts on if he thought that these trades would happen, would he accept them, or would he decline them. So again, these are from Bleacher Report, and they took place a little bit before the Zach Parise, Ryan Suter buyouts, and before all these moves that were made before leading up to the expansion draft. So we're just going to kind of get our thoughts on these trades. And again, it was from the Bleacher Report and kind of the 5 teams that the Sabres were to be in potential trade negotiations with Buffalo. Again, nothing was set in stone, but it was rumored that these 5 teams were the teams that the Sabres were talking to. So we already discussed with the Anaheim Ducks and kind of what could possibly happen with them with the Sabres, and this is the trade proposal that the Anaheim Ducks had kind of come up with here, and it was Rickard Rakell, Isaac Lundestrom, Jacob Perreault, and the 3rd overall pick. Again, we had discussed earlier with Trevor Zegras, would he be the main piece for Anaheim, and if they were unwilling to trade him, would something like this be enough? Obviously, they'd need to take some salary back. Maybe Rickard Rakell was that instead of a Henrique or a Kessler, but accept or decline this trade, Austin?
Again, that package isn't really, I don't think it's totally far off. I mean, Lundestrom, Perreault, and 3rd overall is 3 decent pieces. I just think if you're Buffalo, you'd rather have, a proven younger player like a Troy Terry or a Sam Steele, or if you can get Comtois, you get Comtois. But instead of the one issue I have with that package is just Rickard Rakell. I mean, they could always flip him. He's their cap dump in. But I would rather Buffalo go for a guy like Adam Henrique to be the cap dump. I mean, he's a center. He's that veteran presence in the locker room you want to have. He's got a little bit more term left. Rakell would be a piece that you bring in and you probably look to move and flip. Whereas if you've got a different piece like an Adam Henrique, you're probably going to keep that for the rest of his contract until he wants out. Again, not a terrible package, but I think that's more of a quantity over quality piece. I know the 3rd overall pick was in there. Jacob Perreault is a very good prospect, but Lundestrom and Rakell, I think you can upgrade on a little bit if you're the Sabres.
Yeah, I think you had mentioned Sam Steele would be somebody you'd be looking at, or a Max Comtois would kind of be 2 pieces that you would want from Anaheim, and the Rickard Rakell thing just doesn't make sense. It'd be nice to see another Perreault in a Sabres jersey with Jacob Perreault, not related at all to Gilbert Perreault, but that'd be nice as well. But interesting from Anaheim there without Zegras if they would make that trade. So moving on to Minnesota, and again, this was prior to the Parise and Suter buyouts here. You have Matt Dumba, Jordan Greenway, Victor Rask as kind of the salary dump in that trade, Marco Rossi, and the 21st overall selection. Obviously, the Sabres passed up on Marco Rossi to take his Ottawa 67's teammate in Jack Quinn, who we watched and covered covering the OHL last year and saw those guys. They didn't play necessarily so much together on a line. They played on the same power play together, but they were teammates. It would be interesting to see those two reunite in a Sabres uniform, would it not, Austin?
Yeah, so 3 pieces in that deal I really like. I'm a fan of Jordan Greenway. Obviously, I love Marco Rossi. He was my number 3 prospect in that draft. I had him ahead of Tim Stützle. 21st overall pick is pretty good. I mean, it's not a great first-round pick, but it's what it is. Rask would be the cap dump. Dumba would be a flippable asset that brings some value, and if you can't flip him right away, worst comes to worst, you have a pretty decent defenseman until you flip him. I think that package is getting closer to what it's probably going to look like. I mean, I don't really have minor nitpicks. I don't have a whole lot of bad to say about that. I mean, you're getting Marco Rossi, Jordan Greenway, the 21st overall pick as 3 building blocks. That's pretty good. I mean, Victor Rask isn't going to do a whole lot for you, but you're not expecting him to do a whole lot for you. The Dumba would, if Minnesota gives that up, I mean, I could see Adam saying yes. And me personally, other than a few minor nitpicks, I don't have an issue with it. Worst comes to worst, you have Matt Dumba, a pretty solid player. Best case scenario, you get Dumba and you flip him for even more assets. I know Adams, and again, maybe it's just what we've been hung up on with what we've been hearing for reporting, but I know Buffalo wanted a higher first-round pick than 21st overall. But all in all, I don't know if we'll hear a better package than I'm interested to hear the other ones because I didn't read this Bleacher Report article, so I want to see what the other packages are. But I feel like that'll probably be the strongest one, to be honest.
Yeah, and then like you mentioned, you could flip Dumba for maybe a higher first round pick, or flip him with that 21st to get higher up in the draft, maybe to like you see in the NFL, they kind of trade up things like that. So I would be interested to see if they would package Dumba with the 21st and try to get even higher and kind of make that trade with Marco Rossi, and then you get maybe a top 10-ish pick with that. I think that'd be really interesting. But moving on here, the Los Angeles Kings are another team that obviously we've talked about for lengths on end on this podcast about how deep their prospect pool is, how many top-end prospects are available for the Sabres. And, we've eventually talked about, could they get 3 or 4 of these guys? And, that obviously is not going to be realistic at this point. But the Los Angeles projected trade was Cale Clegg, Gabe Vilardi, Alex Turcotte, and the 8th overall pick. Austin, accept or decline?
Gabe Vilardi, Alex Turcotte, and the 8th overall pick. Again, 3 very strong pieces. Cale Clegg is meh. He was a highly touted prospect back in the day. Never really turned into much. Honestly, decent trade. I don't think that's better than the Minnesota one where you get Rossi, Greenway, 21st overall, and the potential of Dumba, who could turn into more. And to be honest, there's no salary coming back in that LA deal, which I can't imagine, one, LA not wanting to unload a bad contract when you're getting a player like Jack Eichel, and 2, it just those other 2 trades at least had that veteran player with a contract. So while that one isn't terrible, that one doesn't seem realistic. But there is some nice building blocks there. Like I said, Vilardi, Turcotte, 8th overall is a nice foundation there. We know LA is not giving up Byfield. They pretty much already said it. LA is the one team where if they don't give up Byfield, they have plenty of other prospects to give up. So not necessarily means they're out of the game. But to be honest, I think LA is a bit more realistic for Sam Reinhart than Jack Eichel at this point. And I think that was reported yesterday that they've been investigating Reinhart more than they've been investigating Eichel.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Sabres have a couple of these guys that, do you want Eichel? Okay, maybe we don't want him, but you have Ristolainen and Reinhart that you might be looking at as well. So those guys, like you mentioned earlier in the show, maybe those guys are dealt before Jack Eichel just because of the fact that the price is so high for Jack that they go, you know what, we'll take Reinhart because he's going to be a little bit less money and he might be a little bit more intriguing in that. So the Sabres could now maybe capitalize on that and get a good return for Reinhart just because of the astronomical asking price for Jack Eichel at this point. But LA, like you mentioned, Vilardi, Turcotte, and 8th overall is definitely a nice return. And like you mentioned, LA's got the plethora of very good prospects to be able to make that work without giving up Quentin Byfield. They might be one of the only teams in the league that wouldn't have to give up their top prospect in a Jack Eichel trade. So let's move on to Philadelphia. In this one, I don't know if you're going to necessarily like this one. It's Travis Konechny, Shane Gostisbehere, Morgan Frost, and the 13th overall pick. Accept or decline?
Decline. I mean, Morgan Frost probably 2 years ago was one of the best prospects in hockey. Still a nice player. 13th overall is not bad. I'm a big fan of Travis Konechny, but even with Konechny now, is that a ridiculous, ludicrous package that I would slap away instantly? No, I might think about that for a couple seconds and then go, I could definitely get better than that. There's no reason for Buffalo to take on Gostisbehere and Konechny. I mean, they would really only want one of those guys. And other than that, we saw Philly trade Nolan Patrick, who then immediately got flipped. Philly's prospect system is not that great. And we know Buffalo wants mainly futures. It's been widely reported that they mainly want futures in a Jack Eichel deal, aside from probably 1 or 2 pieces. So that, I don't see how they get better long-term from that trade in Philadelphia. Frost maybe turns into something, a top 6 forward. 13th overall pick, you could get something decent for, but no, is it ridiculous? No. Is it something I would accept? No, not even close.
Yeah, there's a lot better trades on this list than the Philadelphia one, and they just traded for Ryan Ellis yesterday. So I don't know what their cap situation is looking like going forward, but I don't know if that would be a trade that Buffalo would kind of accept at this time, just given the fact that they, like you mentioned, they want futures. They don't necessarily want guys that are going to come back and try to help them make the playoffs next year, which obviously Konechny and Gostisbehere would kind of try to help them to do that, but I don't think they're going in that route. So last but not least, the New York Rangers, and oh my goodness, Austin, you and I have had a lot of fun at the expense of Rangers Twitter lately, and just the asking price from not just their fans but their organization with the values that they put on some of their players. Again, I know the Rangers have a good prospect system, but it just seems like to us from the outside here that the Rangers are, they value their players a little bit more than maybe some other people around the league. And obviously they had mentioned that a Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere would be untradeable in any sort of trade that wasn't for somebody named Connor McDavid. And, we kind of had a chuckle about that. But here's the projected trade offer from the New York Rangers. It's Philip Chytil, Vitaly Kravtsov, Braden Schneider, who was their first-round pick last year, and the first-round pick this year, which is 15th overall. Accept or decline from the New York Rangers?
Decline. I mean, me and my buddy Curtis we all talk about this at the Charging Buffalo all the time. I mean, the Rangers actually do have a nice prospect system. If they were actually willing to move pieces, they probably could be maybe not the front runner, but they actually probably could be one of the final two teams for Jack Eichel. I mean, once you start throwing, Lafreniere, sure, okay, I can understand you have a little bit of reservations about giving up a number 1 overall pick. But the second you start saying Capo Caco is untouchable, Keandre Miller is untouchable, I mean, those are two pieces that Buffalo would absolutely have to have in a Jack Eichel trade from them. I mean, they talk about Nils Lundqvist, who's a nice piece, don't get me wrong, not a surefire thing by any means. Neither is Capo Caco for that matter, but he was a second overall pick. He had a strong improvement in his second year. Braden Schneider, you said he's a nice piece too. Not Keandre Miller, Keandre Miller is untouchable. My bad. Philip Chytil, middle six center, second line center. If he hits the ceiling, I don't think he's going to do it. Again, not a bad player. Vitaly Kravtsov, I think because he played so well in Russia, he got all of this hype. He's not as good of a prospect as people think he is. And the one thing that people need to start realizing with Buffalo is they just don't acquire Russian hockey players. They haven't drafted one since Vasily Glodov. I don't remember the last time they don't have a scout in Russia anymore. I mean, they just don't. They don't go after those types of players.
The Grigorenko situation didn't work out very well.
Yeah, whatever happened in that organization, they don't go after and acquire Russian players. You cannot build a prospect package around Chytil and Vitaly Kravtsov, who, as good as he played in the KHL this year, only had 24 points in 46 games. He had 4 points in his 20 NHL games this year. He's not a centerpiece for a Jack Eichel trade. He's got a lot of hype in New York. I mean, the Rangers do a great job of hyping up their prospects more than any fan base I've ever met. If you're not willing to give up Capo Caco, I don't know how you think you can get a Jack Eichel trade done. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, Buffalo is not taking Ryan Strome. They're not taking Zach Jones. No disrespect to Zach Jones. They're not taking, any player that Buffalo wants from New York, the Rangers fans, and apparently the Rangers team and media feel the same way. They're not open to discussion. So while they have the pieces to be there, this team, I made a bet with the guys at the Charging Buffalo, and I will stick to it on the podcast of Future of the 716 after Jack Eichel traded. If he is a New York Ranger and Capo Caco is not part of that deal, I'm going to eat a shoe on my podcast.
Yeah, it just seems like the New York Rangers, again, they, like you mentioned, it's frustrating because they could actually have the pieces to make a trade work, but it seems like a team like Minnesota and LA would actually be willing to give up top A prospects, not B or C type prospects that the Rangers are apparently saying that are level A's when all their level A's are untouchable. I don't care, again, what Jack Eichel's contract situation is. They're not trading him to the Eastern Conference unless you're getting some top end prospects back, because you don't want to play that guy coming next year and the years after when you're hoping to be competitive and running into that guy in the playoffs or playing him multiple times within a conference. So if the Rangers really want to get ahead of a team like LA, Minnesota, and Anaheim to try to lure the Sabres away from trading him out west, they're going to have to do a lot better than offering up, Kravtsov, Chytil, and Braden Schneider over, Keandre Miller and Capo Caco. And if they don't value Lafreniere as somebody that they would even think about trading, then the Sabres are just going to trade him out west because A, it's better to trade him out west, and B, those teams are just offering up better prospects and better packages. The Rangers seem to think that they have all the leverage here when they aren't the only team that is willing to trade for a guy like Jack Eichel, and I just think that they're kind of waiting there and showing the Sabres, you know, are you going to come back to us with the offer that we have? And if I'm Kevin Adams, I'm just saying, no, take a hike. Like, I'm hanging up the phone because these offers are just not going to cut it for trading away my franchise player for some of your B and C level prospects when you continue to make those other guys untouchable who really shouldn't be untouchable when you're getting a guy of this caliber, a possible top 10 player in the league.
I agree. And I mean, there's one team I think that needs to be talked about that kind of, I mean, they're in on every big name player. I don't know how they keep doing it, but they do. I think the Vegas Golden Knights will be a team that try and sneak in there too, which I also think have more pieces to offer. And two, unlike the Rangers, they probably are willing to give up. I mean, that stat, when they traded Cody Glass to Nashville for Nolan Patrick after he was flipped to Nashville for Ryan Ellis, they traded, I believe the stat was they traded every pick from their 2017 draft. Every prospect that they had from that draft is gone.
And a lot of first round picks too. Brandstrom's gone. Nick Suzuki's gone. Like, they're willing to make moves. It's just, despite how horrible their cap situation is, Vegas is, and Brian McCrimmon and that team they're willing to make moves.
That's what I mean. They're willing to move pieces. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up, you know, trying to make it work. Again, how they're going to do it cap wise, I have no idea. But that's what I'm saying. Like, if a team like that enters the discussions all of a sudden, we know people know they're willing to move pieces. They're not scared to trade prospects because they don't care about their prospects. Let's just be honest. They just watched Nick Suzuki, their best prospect that they probably drafted, eliminate them from the playoffs in Montreal. They still do that trade for Pacioretty 10 times out of 10. Like, that's just how McCrimmon and McClellan? No. Who the heck? McCrimmon and whoever their president is. He used to run Washington. His name's escaping me right now. But that's how they run. They go out. If there's a big name, they go get him and do whatever they can to make it work. So would it take a lot of cap gymnastics to get Eichel in Vegas? Yeah, but I can guarantee you Vegas would be willing to offer more pieces than supposedly. Again, we're going off of fans and what the media say. We don't really know what the Rangers are willing to reportedly give up. But based off everything that's been reported, they're not willing to give up anything. The Rangers don't belong in the Jack Eichel trade discussion.
Agreed. So those are kind of just 5 teams that we kind of looked at and thought, you know, would be interesting to discuss with the Jack Eichel trade and kind of, you know, an idea of what you could expect back for Jack Eichel in a trade of that magnitude, because they need to hit a home run on this trade. It can't be another Ryan O'Reilly trade or this franchise is going to be in trouble. And again, I'll quickly go over the polls. We're not going to touch on them too much here. Again, I had put up a poll about Vladimir Tarasenko being available because of the Blues' kind of situation with him and kind of being unrepairable. He's now been exposed in the expansion draft. The Twitter poll basically said, and the response to that was he's not a fit with future plans with the Sabres, and we're kind of both in agreement with that. Just doesn't make any sort of sense to trade for a guy like Vladimir Tarasenko, 76.3%. And then if Jack Eichel were to be traded, what would Anaheim have to give up in that trade? Zegras plus third overall was a whopping 72.1% out of the other options there. Comtois in the third and Zegras alone. Austin already discussed that he thought that Zegras alone with a cap dump would not be enough for Jack Eichel. And then obviously with that poll, we put that up and it was 89.8% that you would definitely need to get more than just Trevor Zegras. So the fans agree with Austin on that one. And lastly, will Jack Eichel be traded before the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs? He did not get traded, but overwhelmingly the poll said yes. And to those people, 32.7% that said no, you guys are currently winning, but we'll see if he is traded at the draft or before or after the free agent frenzy. So thank you very much to everybody who participated in the polls, and we will always put those up for interactive shows. So stay right here. Go ahead.
I got one more thing to say about Vegas. It was, those 3 first-round picks from 2017. You brought up Brandstrom. Yeah, Glass, Suzuki, Brandstrom, all gone. So all 3 of their first-round picks from 2017, they're not in the organization that's 4 years old. They don't have a first-round pick from their inaugural draft.
That's incredible. That really is. And I don't think Seattle's going to be going in that route with Ron Francis. I think he's going to be taking a more conservative route. And again, I think the GMs got smarter this time around without giving Vegas a lot of top end assets to kind of start their franchise with. That they kind of were playing with house money, pun intended, for being in Vegas. But they were able to go out and acquire guys like Stone and Pacioretty and make all these ridiculous trades and make their team competitive from the beginning. So I don't know if that's going to happen, especially with who they're going to get from the Sabres in that regard. But stay right here. I'll be right back, and we're going to get into our last segment today, and that is going to be the Sabres draft and just kind of discussing what players might be available for the Sabres going forward in the draft later on that Austin has a liking for. So stay right here. I'll be right back on the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition, and right here in the Armchair GM Sports Network.
Experience a new way to play daily fantasy sports and esports on Thrive Fantasy. Thrive's game concept revolves around player props, which are simple over-unders on player stats. There are contests for traditional sports including the NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, and cricket, as well as esports titles including CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, and more coming soon. Here's how to play. Choose your lineup of over-unders for top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Each prop has a fantasy point total based on how likely it is to hit. The more points the selection is worth, the riskier it is. Rack up the most points and win a share of the prize pool. Thrive is awarded over $2 million in cash, so come and prop up today.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network, the Niagara region's best local source for North American sports podcasting coverage. By sports fans, for sports fans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the final segment of today's Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition. Brandon Caputo and Austin Broad back with you here. Make sure you're hitting that subscribe button, liking us, and hitting that bell icon for all updates on our YouTube channel, and give us some love there on the video version. So with that said, Austin, let's end today's show here with just quickly your thoughts on, we probably won't have another episode up before the draft happens, so kind of just previewing the Sabres draft and kind of where they're looking at here. So up on the screen on the video version on YouTube, I have the picks for the Sabres. They obviously have their first round pick. They have the second round pick, the 2 third-round picks, the 4th round pick.
2 seconds.
2 seconds. They got from Boston and St. Louis. They also have let's see,
2/3.
2/3, because they acquired this thing's kind of confusing. It's messing me up here, but they got they got the 3rd from Montreal and the 3rd from Florida in the in 2 trades there, and then they traded their 3rd to the Rangers for VC. So they have 2/3. They have their own 4th. They have their own 5th plus, or they have their 5th from Montreal. Their 5th has gone to the Devils in the Wayne Simmons trade. They have a 6th from Colorado for the great Jonas Johansson, plus their own 6th and their own 7th. So as confusing as that is, they hold picks in every round, plus an extra 2nd, an extra 3rd, and an extra 6th, Austin. So let's quickly go up here again. We expect the Sabres to possibly get another first-round pick here if they're able to make a trade for Jack Eichel, if they end up getting, another top 5 pick or another pick in this first round here. Is Owen Power the guy that you're selecting with 1st overall, given the Sabres won the draft lottery? We know how much William Eklund is valued by, the fan base around here, and that the Sabres are really high on William Eklund. There's even a talk that he had said that he thinks he's going 1st overall a few months ago. So do we think that there's anything of significance behind that smoke, or do you think that Owen Power is eventually going to be the 1st overall pick by the Buffalo Sabres, even given the fact that he might go back to college for one more year?
Yeah, so I think it doesn't matter who Buffalo takes. I think whoever Buffalo takes is probably not going to be in the NHL next year. Don't quote me on that. I know Eklund said the same thing. He wants to go back to Sweden, but he would talk to the team that drafts him. Power said the same thing. I'm leaning towards going back to Michigan, but I'll talk with the team that drafts me. All in all, do I think Owen Power is still going to be the guy? Yeah. I think he's still probably the guy. But I'm telling you, I'm at least at a 50% chance that they take William Eklund. I mean, power, go check out my deep dives on him on FC and on the Charging Buffalo. You'll see that he has a lot of upside. He still has some areas he needs to work on, but he's got a lot of upside as a defenseman. He's definitely, you can build a blue line around him and Rasmus Dahlin going forward. But Eklund is, oddly enough, probably in Buffalo, one of the most highly touted forwards, especially among that fan base. Probably because, like we said, one, that's a guy that we've been high on at the Charging Buffalo a lot in particular. I know Matty Beniers was the popular guy that Buffalo should be taking, but here at the Charging Buffalo, like me, Curtis, Joe, we were Paul, Walt, we were all high on Eklund from the beginning. I think he was in our top 3 for all year long. Me and Curtis put out our final rankings like a day ago. We each had Eklund as our number 1 guy. I had Power personally at number 2. I still don't think he'll end up being the guy. I think they'll play it safe and go with Power. But I am not 100% convinced like I was when the draft lottery was won that Owen Power was a lock to be the guy. I mean, we'll see what happens next Friday. I just don't be surprised, but don't be surprised if Eklund ends up being the guy. But prepare for Owen Power, because I just, with the lack of views, and we know that big mobile defensemen, no matter what, they're always going to be highly valued. We'll see. I mean, in my heart of hearts, I want William Eklund, but I know it's going to be Power, so I'm just trying to juggle that. And as each day goes by, I wake up and go, okay, Eklund's going to be a Sabre. Then the next day I wake up and I'm like, nah, it's Owen Power. So we'll see what happens, how I'm feeling Friday. But prepare for Power, but don't rule out the possibility that Eklund becomes first overall, because out of every team that's talked, I think Buffalo's the only one that values him as the best forward in this draft. And whether they're playing mind games, they made William Eklund their first prospect interview. Again, I don't know what that means, but it's interesting, and something interesting to be said, that Power was supposed at the consensus number 1, and they talked to Eklund first. So who knows?
Yeah, again, they could be playing mind games like you said, but it is, common knowledge that the Sabres do value William Eklund a lot higher than maybe some of these other teams do. And would you be upset if they, quote unquote, reached for a guy like William Eklund over Owen Power, who is the consensus number 1 at this point?
Well, no, because like I said, in my mind, it's not a reach. I have Eklund as my number 1 prospect in the draft, so I don't think it's a reach at all. Would I be upset if Eklund's not the pick? No, because I've done a lot of work into Owen Power, and he's a guy that I am also excited about. So I think as long as it's one of those 2 guys, I'm going to be happy. I don't think Beniers has a chance at being number 1. I don't think Mason McTavish has a chance at being number 1. I know he was NHL Central Scouting as number 2 North American skater, so he's a guy that might go higher than I thought. But I really think in terms of Buffalo, it's Power, Eklund, and whoever they pick is whoever they pick. I mean, in a perfect world, they do go out and get that other top 5 pick, and we get both, and we're solid going forward. But we'll see what happens. I mean, they're going to play it safe more than likely and take Power. But like I said, I mean, we've all allowed ourselves to at least be open to the possibility that it's not Power anymore. So I think as each day goes by and a report doesn't come out that, Buffalo is in fact leaning towards Power, I mean, that's going to keep building up, and we'll see what happens Friday come draft time. But as of right now, it's going to be one of those 2 guys, and I personally don't think they can go wrong with either one.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You could have Owen Power, and him and Rasmus Dahlin could be your cornerstone number 1 defense core for the long term there. But again, either one of those guys, I don't expect either of them to be thrown in as starting day 1 for the Sabres next year. I don't think that should deter the Sabres from taking one or the other, because I really don't think that they need either of them to step in right away. I just don't think that they're in a position to be able to need to do that right now. They're not trying to win right away. They're most likely going to be starting off with a brand new core there, and you don't want to rush those kids in, especially Owen Power. We saw them rush Rasmus Dahlin in, given that his generational talent said that he would be able to play, but we just see that is very difficult for a young player, especially given Buffalo's situation, to jump in there. And we saw with Casey Middlestat was forced into a role too quickly, a top 6 role way too quickly. So I think the Sabres are going to be conservative with this one, and whoever they take between Power and Eklund probably will be good for them not to play for the Sabres, at least to start the year.
Yeah, no, like I said, I mean, Eklund, I probably goes back to Sweden, signs with Rochester at the end of the year, and then comes to Buffalo next year. Power likely goes back to Michigan. You know, they're probably going to be a national championship contender in the NCAA because everyone from that team is going to be back. Plus, you know, the additions of guys like Luke Hughes, Sabres prospect Eric Portillo is going to take over the starting net. Michigan's going to be a good team. I would assume Power goes back, pulls the Cale Makar, pulls the Quinn Hughes, you know, plays his college year, signs with Buffalo, burns his year one of his entry-level deal, and goes from there. I think both prospects need more time in their developmental leagues, but both will be in Buffalo next year, if not the end of this year.
Yeah, Beniers and Owen Power, two Michigan players that could be taken in the top 3 or 4. That'd be pretty interesting to see there for teammates. But let's move on here. Again, the Sabres haven't acquired another first-round pick, so we can't say that they're going to draft William Eklund and Owen Power at this point. So let's move on here to the 2 second-round picks. They don't have their own second, but they have the Blues second-round pick as well. This is one of the lasting pieces from the Ryan O'Reilly trade, and then from the Boston Bruins and the Taylor Hall trade last year, acquiring Anders Bjork as well. So what are we thinking of these 2 second-round picks here, Austin? Are not going to be as high as Buffalo's second would have been, but what are you thinking around here, a guy that you might be interested in?
So yeah, Buffalo's with their second round pick, and the fact that Arizona didn't forfeit their pick, they're just not getting a selection, but they're still in the first round. I don't exactly know how it worked, so I think they're picking 33rd, which is really the 32nd prospect drafted. I'd be looking probably at, again, depending on what they do with number 1, there's a couple forwards that you need to look at with that pick. A guy from Finland, Samu Tuomala, he was very good at the U18s. He was very good in the U20 league over in Finland. He's a goal-scoring forward. Buffalo needs more of that. Don't count out a guy from the first round like a Matthew Samoskevich from the Chicago Steel or Isaac Rosen from Sweden. They're first-round picks. There's always at least one guy who falls. I mean, J.J. Peterka fell last year. Buffalo traded up and got him. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of those 2 guys falls. With their 53rd overall pick from Boston, I mean, you're look for a high ceiling player, whether it's a forward or defense. You can get a guy, again, 2 Finnish players come to mind, Ville Koivunen and Aleksi Haimo-Salmi. Very good players for Finland in their Finnish leagues this year. Haimo-Salmi was very fun to watch at the U18s. I'm interested to see what their draft strategy is, because normally Botterill, when he was here, took low ceiling, safe picks that would for sure play in the NHL. That's why we ended up with Ryan Johnson late in the first round, Matthias Samuelsson with the second round pick. Those guys are going to be good players. Their ceiling is a little bit of a question. I'm hoping, you know, with Carmanos being in charge of scouting and the new front office that they have there, that they take a little bit more of a high risk approach. Again, don't be silly with your draft picks, but take those players with those higher ceilings. And those 3 that I named, I think, are 3 very good options for Buffalo in the second round.
And I want to correct something. The Blues second round pick was traded to Vegas, so the Sabres do have their own own second round pick, which is, like you mentioned, essentially a late first at this point, because it's it's right there at the beginning of the second round. So it's essentially a late first, however you want to call it. So it'll be interesting to see if they have somebody pegged in the late first that ends up dropping to them to being a second round pick. So they essentially get, you know, 2 first round players out of this, which would obviously be great.
Absolutely. That's what I mean. Like there's potential there with that 33rd overall pick, which is really, like I said, the 32nd prospect. So we'll see what happens. And even with that 53rd pick, I mean, there are some options there. It'll just be interesting to see what their draft strategy is. Even with their third round, they got 2 third-round picks as well. Unless a move comes up or one of those picks is gone, the Sabres are going to draft 10 players this year. And the third round, again, you can get very good players. I mean, given the way that the CHL was delayed and the OHL didn't play at all, this is the year where if you're a USHL player, if you're the USHL, you're thrilled, because you're going to have a lot of high picks this year. Like, because even the players that I'm thinking of for Buffalo in the third round, they have a tie to the USHL. I mean, you got Ryan Ufko for Chicago. Again, Ryan Hardy got hired by the Toronto Maple Leafs. He was Chicago Steelers GM. He runs an amazing program. He's going to have a ton of players from his last year in Chicago drafted this year. Owen Power was a graduate of that program before he went to Michigan. So look out for guys like Ryan Ufko. There's a guy from Sweden. Again, we love Swedish players in Buffalo. Let's face it, they do. Victor Soholm, a guy that you and we didn't get to watch because there was no OHL, but I really think that he would have had a really big year. Buffalo, you can never have too many goalies. So with that 95th overall pick, I'm looking at Tristan Lennox from Saginaw. I think he would be a great addition to that. You add him to Portillo and UPL, and you just keep stocking that goalie cupboard. Third round, I'm hoping they do take a goalie at some point. And that third round seems like the sweet spot. There's, like I said, Tristan Lennox. There's a kid. I know we just talked about how they don't really have an affinity for Russians, but there's a kid in Russia, Kirill Gerasimyuk. He's a fantastic goalie. I've scouted him a lot this year. We'll see what they do, but those first 3 rounds, they have 5 picks. I'm hoping all 5 of them will at some point make an impact on the Sabres, because if they can do that, the rebuild will be off to a fantastic start.
The drafting just has to be better. I mean, we've talked about it many times on this show that over the last decade, the drafting just has not been good enough from top to bottom in these drafts, and they need to get drastically better at developing these mid-round picks into NHL players that you can then flip as assets later on, and just create a better competition up and down your organization between Rochester and Buffalo, and just not having quality depth bottom 6 forwards that has been Buffalo's Achilles heel over this 10-year, I guess, rebuild, you can call it, since they last made the playoffs. So again, like you mentioned, those 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, it's going to be huge to see if the Sabres can actually finally get, those guys in here that can have an impact and be those players to fill out the bottom 6. You have those top end guys, but you need to be able to have those productive bottom 9 players and those bottom pair defensemen and extra defensemen. They got to be able to develop those guys into something and have better competition at the goaltending position, like you mentioned. Just having quality prospect goaltenders that make each other better and aren't just given the title of best prospect in the organization just because they have nobody else. So
yep.
You would hope that UPL would get some competition within that and be able to have just better up and down, because we see what the Sabres goaltending situation is, and they've had to call up guys like Michael Hauser, Dustin Tokarski, and just guys that you would not expect to be NHL goaltenders at this point. So all around, that would just be better for the organization. And then, they have a 5th from Montreal. They lost their 5th. They have the extra 6th and a 7th. So just a couple guys later on in the draft that you wouldn't mind the Sabres picking up with those later round picks.
So there's 2 guys late in the draft that I am particularly high on. Again, with my work at FC, I was heavily involved with scouting European players, so I'm going to have a little bit more of an affinity towards them. OHL players we saw play 2 years ago, we don't really know what they're going to be. But for the 4th round pick, I'm looking at a guy like maybe a guy like Isaac Enright that we saw in Niagara. He could go in that 4th to 5th range. But with the 4th round, I'm looking at a kid from Sweden named Lucas Forsell. This kid is highly skilled. He's a fantastic playmaker. He's a great skater. The 2 viewings I had of him, he was the best player on the ice by a long shot. And a kid in the probably 6th or 7th round, again, I know they don't have an affinity for Russian players, but there's a kid by the name of Ilya Fedotov. There is a prospect network. I can't remember their exact name, but they're called their guide the Black Book. We at FC have Fedotov as a late 6th, early 7th round pick. This Black Book has him as the 22nd best prospect in the entire draft.
Wow.
That's how high this kid's upside is. You watch him with the puck, he is Maxim Finiganov on steroids, just for a Sabres comparison there. He is all skill. He has an electric feel to him every time he touches the puck. These are the type of prospects Buffalo needs to be taking in the later rounds. All upside, all upside, all upside. If they bust out, who cares? I mean, the reason we talk about Victor Olofsson so much is he was a 7th round pick. If he busted out, we wouldn't even be angry that they drafted Victor Olofsson in the 7th round. The fact that he turned into something is a huge win. These are the types of players that Buffalo needs to find, and there is a ton of players at the bottom of this draft that are all upside that I hope they take a swing on, because those are the types of players that if we can hit on, we set ourselves up for the future very well.
And again, there's always that KHL factor, but we've seen it work out for other organizations. You look at, a guy like Kaprizov, who people had, he had dropped because people didn't know if he was going to come over or not. And we obviously see what he did for Minnesota, but just some of these guys that, like you mentioned, that have a ton of upside, and they might not come over right away, but if you can lure these guys over, they could have a huge impact in being 6th, 7th round picks. What more can you ask for? Because at that point, it's a crapshoot, and the Sabres need to start, taking more chances on guys like that could potentially be lightning in a bottle, other than what they've been drafting in the 6th and 7th round that really isn't anything anyway. So why not start to take some more chances with that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you're drafting late in the draft, you're looking for high upside guys anyway. I mean, again, no disrespect to the guys they took in Adams' first draft, but Matteo Costantini was a Buffalo Junior Sabre. I don't think he gets drafted unless because he had that tie to the Sabres. Like, he was actually really solid in the USHL this year. He's committed to the University of North Dakota, so he does have the potential to turn into something. But these are the type of players that Buffalo tends to draft, players that they know well and that they have a familiarity with. Don't be doing that in the 7th round. I mean, they're literally free assets anyway. If you can find a guy with extreme high upside, who cares? Take a shot on him and hope for the best. I mean, like, if you start developing players with that upside and set them up properly, you set yourself up better. I mean, Buffalo, Middlestat doesn't look like a miss anymore, which is a good thing. But, Ristolainen was okay, didn't turn into what we thought he was going to be. Nylander, we moved for Jokiharju, so that draft pick worked out, but he was not what we thought he was going to be in Buffalo. I mean, we thought he was going to be as good as William. It's not even close. Like you said, you already touched on it. They are not good at drafting. Hopefully now with Carmanos here, it's Adams' second draft, but it's really his first draft with a legitimate hockey operations department in place. We don't have, Jeremy Crow running it, and it was kind of funny. He was demoted a little bit, reshuffled around the organization. We always joked around and saying, this is what happens when you take Jack Quinn over Marco Rossi. It was a joke, but I would have interested to see what this front office would have done last year at the draft, because I love Jack Quinn. I think he gets widely disrespected for no reason. He shouldn't have been the 8th overall pick. So we'll see what they do this year. I have high hopes. So far, Carmanos has lived up to those high hopes with the hirings. He kept Granato. He hired Sam Ventura. He's doing a really solid job. But every time he does a good job, my hopes for him get higher. So this draft is the next milestone, and we'll see how the scouting department handles it.
So when we talk next on this podcast, probably sometime in free agency, what are you hoping in the next week that happens for the Sabres and kind of would check off all the boxes for you to make you kind of happy? Is it drafting William Eklund or Owen Power? Is it getting a good package for Sam Reinhart or Jack Eichel that includes another first-round pick to draft another one of those guys? Just kind of what is your, I guess, Christmas list for the Sabres beginning of their offseason here, going into the expansion draft, going into the NHL draft, into free agency? Kind of what would excite you the most and make you the most excited about this team going forward here if the right moves were made?
If we're talking right now, strictly between now and the opening of free agency, so I'll exclude free agent signings because I don't know who Buffalo is going to try and sign or what their roster is going to look like. But if we're talking about between now and the day before free agency opens, I'm hoping the deal for Ristolainen is made. I'm hoping there's at least some clarity on the Jack Eichel situation. We have an idea of what's being offered or where he's going. If not, traded. I wouldn't rule out a trade for Jack Eichel happening on the first day of free agency if it doesn't happen at the draft. Because let's face it, it's usually the draft is where the hotbed trades are, because all the GMs, again, normally are together, but they'll be talking a lot at least. So I'm hoping at least there's some more clarity on that. Either he's gone or we know where he's going. Mm-hmm. If Reinhart's dealt, my wish list would be trade Sam Reinhart. Don't let a goalie be the main piece in return for Sam Reinhart, because I think Sam Reinhart's value will never be higher than it is now. He was awesome. We saw him play well at center. I think his value is through the roof right now. So don't trade him for a goalie. Maybe somehow convince him to sign. If they convinced him to sign, that would be awesome. But, either sign Reinhart or trade him for something that's not Jonas Korpisalo or Elvis Merzlikins, because I know that has been the hot topic for Elliot Friedman is Columbus wants Reinhart, Buffalo wants one of Columbus's goalies. I don't like that idea of trading Reinhart for a goalie, so hopefully that doesn't happen. And then with the draft, hopefully they snag one of Power or Eklund, and hopefully a first-round player. You'll see because TCB's guide will be out by then. Hopefully one of those players that we had in our top 32 falls to 33 and Buffalo takes one of them, and I think that's a win. Free agency will be a different animal. I don't know how they're going to approach it, but I think if those clarities of Ristolainen, Reinhart, and Eichel are all done by free agency, we'll have a better idea of how Buffalo is going to attack that part of the offseason.
Yeah, we'll see if they need to sign some guys to get to the cap floor if they trade away all the salary. So it'll be interesting to see when we come back for this episode if the team's going to look drastically different with some new draft picks and with some guys that have now been traded out of the organization with a lot of new assets coming into the organization. It'll be interesting to see kind of our thoughts, after that happens, coming back to talk on the show. But with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up today's episode of the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition and our Sabres offseason preview show right here on the Armchair GM Sports Network, your source of North American sports coverage by sports fans, for sports fans delivered to you right here in the beautiful Niagara region. As always, I'm one of your hosts of this podcast. My name is Brandon Caputo. You can follow me on Twitter at Caputs13_AGM with a Canadian Z. As well, you can follow my co-host Austin at Austin_Broad, and make sure you're checking him out at the Charging Buffalo and all the other great stuff that he is doing covering the draft and with draft prospects. A lot of interesting stuff there that I could go probably talk about 10 minutes about all the stuff Austin's doing with his scouting for the upcoming NHL Draft. Doing a great job as always. And a big thank you to all of our great sponsors. Help put us on, support the network, keeping the show on the air. Make sure you're checking them out and telling them that the Armchair GM sent you. And lastly, to you viewers out there and Sabres fans, hockey junkies, for listening in and tuning along with us for this episode. And once again, this is the Niagara Hockey Lowdown Sabres edition on the Armchair GM Sports Network by sports fans for sports fans. Enjoy the expansion draft, enjoy the NHL Draft, and we'll come back to you guys again in free agency. Take care, guys.
Take care, guys.
You're listening to the Armchair GM Sports Network.